I'm delighted to introduce the National Museum of Royal Navy. And with this submission, the project clearly demonstrated two of the key award criteria within the updated Spectrum standard. Firstly, rethinking cataloguing with a very inclusive approach to the collection. And secondly, it showed the benefits of sharing collections to meet the needs of a range of users. It's a significant decolonisation project, which has been reflected in the museum's new online output, incorporating multiple amalgamated records. Interestingly, using AI, the team also produced a dynamic glossary with guidelines on alternative language and contextual information on language that has been used in the past. This allowed the creation of more inclusive technology to highlight minority or contested histories, as well as other narratives linked to the empire. So I'd like to hand over to Amy at the National Museum of the Royal Navy to talk a little bit more about addressing empire. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Louise, and for everyone. And thank you so much for shortlisting us. We're very excited to be here today and to talk about the project and kind of where we're at and where we're still hoping to go with it. So just a little bit of background. I'm Amy. I'm the Collections Information and Access Manager here at the National Museum of Royal Navy, but this project and the work we're doing really encompasses quite a lot of colleagues, so I'll try and talk about their work as well. So just a bit of background on the National Museum. Oops, I don't know if that's going or not. Typical, isn't it? We tried it and now it doesn't want to work. There we go. So the National Museum of the Royal Navy is kind of made up of individual sort of smaller museums as they were that each represented a different branch of the Navy. So things like our Submarine Museum, which was in Gosport, our main naval museum in the dockyard in Portsmouth, also the Submarine Museum, or sorry, the Fleet Air Museum, which is out in Yeovilton. And we also have, I think, what we say is the Europe, if not the world's largest collection of historic ships as well. So we have HMS Victory again in Portsmouth, but we also have HMS Trincomalee up in Hartlepool and HMS Caroline, which is in Belfast as well. So as you can imagine, being the National Museum of the Royal Navy and our collections representing the history of the Royal Navy, we have a very broad collection, which is really a global collection that really tells the impact of the Royal Navy on not only the UK history, but really global history in the end, which includes things like themes around the British Empire and the role of the British Navy in sort of establishing the British Empire, but then maintaining it as well. And also lots of things, you know, we represent an armed forces. So we have a lot of history around conflict as well, and kind of other sort of difficult histories we really need to think a lot about. So I just want to give a warning at the beginning of this presentation that some of the things that I might show or speak about might be seen as either upsetting, offensive, triggering, or other things. So again, if you want to kind of bow out for the next kind of 10 or 15 minutes because you find it upsetting, please do so. Or also please come and speak to us. We would love to engage further in these conversations. And what we are doing is also constantly evolving. So what I say today might be out of date in 10 minutes or even 5 minutes after the presentation. So we're also aware of that as well. So where did this kind of project all start? Well, it really began for us kind of in two places, sort of around the same time. So we had a project called Title Tea Time, which was an ARRHC funded project, which we were able to bring in a community group we'd already been working with called Chat Over Chai and bring them in to do a kind of more focused research project, particularly around some key objects in our collections. At their choice, really, that really showcased the kind of history of the British Empire within our collections. And the project was really led to kind of revise approaches and treatments of those subjects and how we could further research them and better contextualize them and represent them going forward. At the same time, we had a request from our Board of Trustees to set up an advisory group in 2021, again, looking at reviewing the legacy of the British Empire, as many people were doing within their collections, and particularly around the story of the Royal Navy and really having the engagement from the Royal Navy as well in that kind of history and evolved. And that group was comprised of staff from across the business. The two really spoke to each other as well, as we're saying. So the Title Tea Time actually really helped shape that group. And they even renamed it because originally it was called the Decolonization Working Group. And when we spoke to the group about it, they found that really triggering and upsetting for various reasons. So they helped us kind of rename that group as well. Both groups helped start to identify collections that needed further resource, required kind of particular contextualization and really areas of sensitivity. So for example, one that kind of comes up for us quite a lot is this Buddha statue, which was taken from what was known, or also known as the Summer Palace, by particular royal marines near the end of what is known as the Second China War in 1860 as well. So an example of some of the objects that you can find in our collection. And it's just worth noting we're still working with our Chat Over Chai group, and they're helping us on some other projects and upcoming work, particularly around things like HMS Trincomalee, which is up in Hartlepool, and kind of the history of that ship being built in India and things as well. So how did this start to filter down into our other areas of work in the organization? Well, one of the biggest aims of the Addressing Empire group was to actually look at and decolonize the language that we used in ourselves as an organization and thinking about that. So to do that, we looked at some glossary work, which lots of others are doing as well, and particularly about creating a specific glossary that worked for us as an organization. And my colleague, Hannah, was really involved in creating that and still is. And at the moment, it's now a dynamic document, which is over 100 pages long, lists various terms, some offensive and or outdated, some simply there just for information. It provides guidelines on alternative language people can use or how to contextualize that term, and also gives history of it as well. Again, being a kind of armed forces service museum, the Royal Navy have their own kind of language as well, which can be problematic, which is called Jack speak. So we not only have things in the glossary, which are kind of perhaps more obvious racist terms or things to do again with empire, but also things particularly to do with Navy. And this document, again, wasn't just created by staff, but we also had volunteers involved in creating it as well, and particularly where we have a wealth of volunteers who are ex-Royal Naval Service personnel themselves. They helped us as well with a lot of that Jack speak and how to better understand that. Colleagues then really used this and tried to promote it across the organization. And we did a lot of kind of advocacy sessions, and we have lunch and learn sessions to really get people engaged, understanding and using it. And we've had quite a lot of success with that, with people really rethinking the terminology and the language that they're using in their work, whether that be volunteers or staff. So it's been really great. And again, it's a live document. So I think Hannah even did an update to it, I think just yesterday on our intranet, which was great. But we really wanted to think, how do we then reflect this in our collections? Is all this great work, we really need to embed this in our collections practices. This is kind of the bedrock of where our stories come from. So if we're not reflecting it there, then that's kind of a massive missed opportunity. So the first thing we did is we took that opportunity to review the language that we were using in our collections management system. When we started looking, it became very obvious that our collections data starkly showed old attitudes and really created intellectual barriers that we kind of already knew existed, but we hadn't really had a way to deal with up till now. So we used the glossary and we focused on key terms. We've not done them all, it is 100 pages, but we really picked some kind of key terms that we thought were really important to start with and kind of packaged them out to our curatorial team to review. So essentially they did a text search on free text things like descriptions and titles and started looking for these terms and either replaced it where possible, or like in this example where it's the title of the item, we couldn't replace it. So just to better contextualize it and really add where we could as much kind of additional information as possible. Again, note this is still working. We're still lots of terms and language in our database that we're constantly trying to review, but it's something that, again, the staff are having a lot more confidence when they're cataloging something new or when they're updating records, that they can refer back to this glossary and have a way to kind of update that information appropriately. The other big thing we did at the time as well, which we thought was really keen, was to introduce what we call content warnings. So we didn't want to hide these things away. We didn't want to hide these histories. We wouldn't want it to be really open about them, but we also wanted to give people, whether they were internal users or external audiences, the options to engage with these histories. So we thought the best way to do this was to introduce these content warnings, which you can see pop up in the actual description themselves. So as much as possible, and where we've had time, we not just add content warning, but again, we add the context of why that content warning is there. And also even in the title, because it might be like an exact title, like this example is from a photograph album where that's what it's been physically titled in that item. So we can't really kind of change that, but also like just in the description as well. We also introduced visual content warnings, so that people could, again, when there was an image, this is once you clicked onto an item on our online portal, but it will come up before you click on, that will be the first image. So you don't see the actual image of the digitized image of the item, you see that first and you can then choose. At the same time, we were bringing in a digital asset management system. So actually how we were layering these digital images in the content warnings, we did actually lose that functionality, unfortunately, because the way our images feed. But it then really opened a conversation with us between our DAMs and our CMS supplier to say, right, this is something that actually perhaps should be embedded in these systems and an option that's available in the system. And we've found kind of a community of other users who are having the same thing. And we're really looking forward to kind of the update to our DAM system, which should hopefully bring in this functionality directly in the system going forward. Not only did we want to bring this in digitally, but also in a physical setting as well. You know, we're kind of used to kind of going in our stores and not thinking twice about necessarily what we were looking at all the time. And again, working through that Title Tea Time project, we brought the community group into it, and they perhaps opened a box of photographs and immediately found something that they found quite triggering on just lifting a lid on a box of photographs. Again, we didn't think about that necessarily in the past in the same way, or even we had a more recent example of a query through our access service and a member of staff like looking at some items, and again where we have conflict items, again looking at photographs and then potentially showing things like dead bodies, etc., which would be quite upsetting. So we've brought in physical things as well, such as content warning stickers, but also physical like folders around items depending on what it is, so that again people can choose whether to see it or not, and just be warned about that before they open that content. So again, it's about when we find these things, we're trying as much as possible to do it at every opportunity we can. And we also give warnings now to the public before they go on a stores tour as well, so they're aware that they might come across things that they find upsetting, and to kind of encourage those conversations where people feel comfortable having them with us. In a similar vein, we were doing a really large project to completely update and change our collections, our online collections portal at the time. So we only had about 1% of our collections available online, and it was all very edited and pretty. And we were moving towards the model of actually releasing the vast majority of our collections online where we could. So we went from 1% to 70% of the collections being available online. And we really wanted to highlight and focus that this really key work was going on and that we were conscious of it as well while we were doing this. So we immediately wanted to put a kind of statement available on our collections portal, which again, we looked around at a lot of other organizations who are doing great work in this area as well and tried to fit something that worked for us. And again, just to say that we're open to these conversations and we really want people to engage where they can. Unfortunately, we haven't necessarily had anybody, or maybe fortunately, I'm not sure, engage or kind of contact us from this vein as of yet, but we would really encourage people to do so. And again, just recognizing that this is ongoing work for us as well and a learning curve. The last one that we were really kind of interested in is keywords and how people search and look for these collections. You know, we've been really great in the past about outlining our kind of comfort area of like really particular naval history, but like we've said, we've always been aware that our collections are very global, have a really global impact, and also have a lot of other histories involved in them that aren't necessarily easy to find or search for. Even things like themes like around LGBTQ, our keywords don't necessarily reflect and therefore make these items visible. If you can't search and find it on the database, then how are you going to know that there's these items in the collection that can help better represent these histories and these communities? So we really took a long look at our terminology and restructured it so we could better highlight and have better keywords and terminologies that we could apply to our databases to highlight these. But we also were really interested in how we could use AI technologies to generate these keywords as well. And we were interested as to whether it would just perpetuate the biases that already existed using these technologies, or whether it would actually help us and highlight, you know, histories that we hadn't necessarily thought of and keywords we wouldn't necessarily think of. So we've been doing a number of trials with our partners at the University of Southampton and also the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium around using these technologies and how they have worked. And I would say it's a bit of a split. So we had some examples where they clearly are perpetuating bias. So you can see this example on screen here is a description that we did a lot of work that's clearly been sort of edited and better contextualized. So we don't want to use the terms battlefield trophy anymore. That's like kind of outdated language for us. But unfortunately, what's the first thing that it spat back at us? Trophy and battlefield. So it was a really interesting example to say that's something we purposely removed, and it's kind of regenerated and brought that back to us. Also, it does seem very good at bringing up words like World War II and kind of general sort of themes and topics that we naturally would. But an area that perhaps it is really helpful, which we're not great at adding, is really like those place names, those geolocations that we don't necessarily always have time to tag out, and it's really been helpful in that area. So in many ways, it spurred us on to continue doing this work and to continue working in it and really help these technologies develop and train in a way that are going to better represent future themes and ideas going forward, and also made us think about where we put our data and how we publish our data into the public domain, areas like Wikipedia and things that we can kind of better increase the sources that these technologies are trained on, so that they have better examples and things to be trained off of rather than continue to perpetuate those biases as well. So just again, thank you very much. Again, this is an ongoing thing for us, really. And I'd like to thank my other colleagues, Claire, Hannah, and Karen, who've been involved. And just to say that this work has really provided, and this project has really provided us with a great foundation and the confidence to be able to talk about these subjects, better contextualize them, and think about how we can better share these stories going forward and involve the communities who are involved. And we're working on that through other projects, such as a figurehead project that we have going on right now, which you can see one of our figureheads, HMS Madagascar, which is obviously very embroiled in different contextual history. So we really feel confident we can take it into other projects and deploy it in other ways now as well, which is great.
Great, thank you so much, Amy. Really appreciate it.